to think about discussing the report that has been in circulation for very long. Mr. Venu, who's joining us online, couldn't join us in person, but we have been talking about this particular study for some time now. I will talk about the index and the report, the rationale behind why we thought about getting this organized and done as a periodic study within the center. This is the Center for New Economic Studies. We have Dr. Bhaskar, who is principally authoring, anchoring this project along with three students. Zil Doshi, who's here in person, Aryan Govind Krishnan, who's joining online. Aryan and Aditi will request you to maybe switch on your cameras and so that others can see you. Most of the time, I'm myself not able to see you that often. But they have been I think, principal actors, agents in driving this study. It's taken more than, I would say, 8 to 9 months for us discussing this with different focus groups, academics, policy enthusiasts. Um, we have with us a more esteemed panel. I appreciate each one of you joining in person, but also those joining online from different circles. I have a few things to add and say about um, and the question which was often asked about what ideas the center, all of these institutions are doing at the university. It's timely to discuss these in the sort of appropriate moments when we get time to either reflect or make things a little bit more clear. So I'll talk a little bit about the ideas and CNES in terms of what we've tried to do as the conversation sort of moves on. But one of the few details that is important to put in context or perspective is the stakeholdership of knowledge creation, which for the center's context, that is CNS, was relying a lot on active student participation from within the university. While for ideas, it's for faculty members from different schools who are actively involved in anchoring the research character or identity of what the institute reflects. One of the first things that we are all seeing ourselves as is to acknowledge that we're all citizens of knowledge. We are committed in largely a process of knowing that seeks to transcend disciplinary boundaries. And in that case, sometimes you are taking what you may consider as an adisciplinary approach. There is methodologically less cohesion or coherence. And that's what technology has done. Generally in not social sciences per se, but in any science, the seeking to know beyond what we already know from our own accumulated wisdom is it goes much beyond what traditional methods were able to impart. There are certain principal elements that have a lot of utility even in the current context. But there is a huge churn, and I think what the pandemic years did between 2020 and 2022, 23 is really catalyze that transition. So I feel academia, in a general sense, has still a lot to do to absorb the seismic nature of this change. And within social sciences, a lot of the methods, when we been applying ethnography, econometrics, mathematical approaches of existing methods in quantitative or qualitative methods, one of the things that now is making every researcher to really sort of question himself or herself is to take a wider consultative approach in involving different stakeholders involved in both conducting the work that is principally designed in terms of the research questions, but also in terms of getting a more robust feedback loop, a feedback loop that is critically um, available to researchers, but also valuable for the way the work progresses. So this panel and this discussion today is a step in that regard, which is what we are trying to understand and acknowledge is a fact that we have a small measure of a work in progress as an industry design. A lot of the initial work was done in 2021 on AEI. And what and where this sort of agency has, or this project has expanded, is to constantly keep adding, deleting existing indicators. So when Zeal, Arvind, Aditi, all of them as students got involved in this, there was a lot of there's a lot of data points out there, but we didn't know how to structure it coherently, put it together. So one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about as part of the initial discussion on the nature of knowledge creation is to see how, as researchers, there is a more intrinsic motivation amongst us, and also from an administrative standpoint, to democratize epistemic knowledge systems. One of the efforts in that regard on campus for us to do through ideas is to involve researchers who are working across different schools, institutes, and bring them all together and see what can happen. But there were a few things which were very important. When you talk about epistemic knowledge systems, these are heavy loaded jargon terms, but generally, if you understand any knowledge system, they are born out of distinct wombs of their own constructs and design. Where I think in social science, the real struggle is for an economist to meet a sociologist, or a sociologist to meet an anthropologist. And while they're looking at similar questions, there are different approaches and perspectives they're bringing to the table. So I'll give you an example with the AEI's context, which is if you look at the subject of inequality, or sort of understanding relative measures of poverty, human capability, these are all areas which you would say are of interest to almost any social scientist, or they may not necessarily be of interest only to social scientists, but those engaged in areas of public humanities, arts and social sciences, policy making, could be anything. But what is the effort here about? The effort is mostly to create microcosmic spaces for allowing experiments where subjects and discussions around inequality could be of a wider interest to those who may or may not see studying it from an academic standpoint. When I say an academic standpoint, what it means is that you may not be a scholar working on inequality measurement, but you may still have something to say about it. So what did we do? One of the things that was tried as a step in the direction of creating an industry was um, to understand and update and improvise the study of inequality in terms of access to basic social and economic services. This was seen for among households for states and union territories across India. The question here is of a conceptual one, which is if you look at from Amartya Sen to Ravi Kanpur to Pranab Bardhan, Deepak Nair, all of them, who have been in fields of development studies, political sociology, addressing this sort of in context to South Asia and India. The point of inequality measurement has often been argued to go beyond income, wealth, determinate measures or objectively determined criteria, to also include questions about basic opportunities, capabilities. And the question then comes is of, all right, how do you measure it? Unfortunate as that may is for policy making spaces where you do not provide an objective, measurable, coherent criteria, and do not provide what you say sophistication of infographic elements. Most of the studies seem to be lost somewhere in climate change. But as the Sudarshan has often pointed out, and I'll come to introducing all of the panelists, their own role in making this panel so vital for us is the reports also become an end in themselves, which is that everything that we are doing becomes so important for the construction and design of an elegant report. What we are trying to understand is through a feedback loop is what all scholars are doing in context to India or South Asia more broadly, which can help determine more objective indicators. So what we mean by access, let me sort of move to talking about AI. Access in general means a way of approaching, reaching, or entering a place or as a right or opportunity to either access in terms of availability, approachability, affordability, or appropriateness. Now, this is the broader definition of access coming out from the public health source. In public health, there is a lot of frameworks, and I would sort of compliment Dr. Vindalini for being initially the person who sort of was very critical that a lot of discussions in economics on access are very outcome based, which is how, in terms of outcomes distribution, you have a certain number of beds available for healthcare treatment, certain number of schools available for education, courts available for legal recourse. As important as that may, we're also looking at input factors and designs. So, which are the pillars that the index seeks to provide? And Dr. Bhaskar will give a long, elaborate presentation on the study, but where I wanted just the pillars to be clear is we're talking about basic amenities, healthcare, education, legal recourse. Initially, in the 2021 iteration, we was using the word access to justice, and it came out for us to we realized that conceptually it was problematic. When we say access to justice, justice could mean so many. Maybe it's a much broader, philosophically rich term. So we used the word then legal recourse as a way to adapt and change that. But we're not talking about certain basic facilities that are important for justice to be delivered institutionally. There is then access to socio-economic security, which things and indicators include in terms of ensuring social safety nets, particularly in case we talk about states that are highly demographically rich on minority populations, what kind of socio-economic security measures they have. Now, as I said, the study has been floating in many circles for I think now a few years. Raj Shetty in the Development Studies Lab at Harvard, a group of researchers from Dr. Kaushik Basu, Wendy in UCL. What I've been trying to do is to constantly at different stages talk to different scholars, not just economists, about how the index can keep on evolving and changing, but without losing its essence or core character, which is that it's trying to ultimately, for states in India, measure how basic relative poverty measures or relative inequality measures can be given a sense. Now, in the findings, there is a lot of details mentioned. I don't want to get into that, but in finding regional, spatial, and social identity-based markers that are added in this version of the report. So what does that mean? Now, the multidimensional nature of the inequality discourse in India is such that when you bring rural and urban areas into question, when you bring social identity-based markers into question, like caste, the identity of religious minorities, the entire set of data points and stories change for people. And that's the level of heterogeneity and stratification of the population that we're talking about. So it's extremely complex. And indices have, by design, a structural limitation. They are contested in a lot of ways. The comment we get often while talking about this particular study is that no serious academic who works on theory takes these indices very seriously. To which is, that I find is in itself a very difficult thing to take the conversation forward. But what we've continuously tried is to make this, as I said, a democratic knowledge product which is made accessible as a public good, a service for everyone to understand. The UNDP now in the Delhi, and a couple of centers now have tried to pick this up as a way they can produce multidimensional indices. The Niti Aayog version of the multidimensional poverty index has not done what in their views is an elaborate job in having a larger cohesive net of indicators. So you can create indices out of nowhere. That's not the point. Methodologically, it's not that difficult. but what is the purpose of the rationale that needs to be elaborated. So we'll discuss a lot of this as we take the conversation forward. I want to briefly introduce all our panelists, and I would let maybe Seth introduce himself for after a while, who's visiting us from where are you visiting us from?
Oh.
It's like the
Oh, here. Sorry. Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. Very honored to be here and grateful. I work for Apple's sustainability team on a sustainable supply chain resilience pilot. I have not been in the corporate world that long. I'm actually more familiar and comfortable in these settings than corporate boardrooms. I'm going to tell the short story is I'm a good friend of Professor John Wendren, who many of you may know. I worked in China for over a decade with NYU School of Law and with a center that was based at Columbia Law School, working on law and development issues of environmental and labor. So that's the background I bring to this. I'm very interested to hear the discussion on the report. I know virtually nothing about India, so please do not take anything I say as representative of Apple's opinion about India. I'm in a learning mode, and I'm here. Again, this worked out really well, and it was very timely. So excited to meet all of you and to participate in the discussion.
Okay. So let me quickly introduce all our panelists. We have with us Professor Ramaswamy Sudarshan. He's had distinguished careers in the fields of research, development, programming, governance. He's the dean of the Government and Public Policy School, but more importantly, and everybody can find everybody's biographical and profile details website, but why the curation of the panel is an important exercise. I would say that there are 2 or 3 life and intellectual mentors for personally me and generally for those within the center. Dean Sudarshan, Dr. Naresh Singh, Dr. Sunil Kaur, who's joined us online, and also Mr. Venu. I mean, all 4 of those who are present have been instrumental in the way the journey of the research center has shaped itself in the last 7 years. And whatever confidence it has given us to expand that sort of microcosmic experiment exercises now ideas. Mr. Venu gave us the confidence to democratize knowledge systems by writing and being part of a public humanities project. I mean, he constantly scolds me a lot of times about making things more coherent and less jargon intensive as possible. Dean Sudarshan was instrumental in the ways the center got its first, I think, seed grant to do work in not just India on urban informality, but also in Cambodia, which is the other country and space we've been working. Dr. Naresh Singh, I would say, is as the executive dean of the School of Government and Public Policy. My association with him extends way beyond JGU, but one of the key things that I have learned from him or seek to imbibe is this constant need to evolve and experiment with and within outside disciplinary spaces. His work on complexity economics and what he's bringing, I think, with his insights to the university has been phenomenal, and we've all been sort of blessed to have both Dean Sudarshan and Dr. Naresh Singh. We have Professor Marx with us, who is someone who I mean, we all revere and respect, but what has happened is that you need scholars not just to repute their experience, but sometimes those who can guide the way forward for not just students but also us, in the way the research is shaped of the institutions we're part of. We have with us Dr. Bhaskar, who is the main author of this study, who will make the presentation as we go forward. He has a PhD from IIM Ahmedabad. He's with the School of Business in the university. He has his bachelor's and master's from IT Kharagpur in industrial chemistry. Worked at Ernst& Young in climate change and sustainability services, and has worked as a social science lecturer previously. His research interests like carbon pricing, climate finance, other things. So with Siddharth, it's been great, collaborating, for some time now. He was blessed also to have an excellent team. Aditi Desai was joining us from Bombay. She's been working in the center for almost 2 years now. RN Govind Krishnan and Zeel Doshi. Zeel is here in person. So though Zeel is now no longer formally part of the center, but she was involved in the center's project work on the report. So just the final introduction, and then we move forward with reflections from students, to talk about their own experience about working on this and then the presentation. Dr. Divya Gupta, who is joined us as a panelist, I was saying that to make it more gender inclusive, I felt that we had to have a lot more of women on the panel, not just because it's just by design and architecture. But we're talking about access. We had a long discussion about how, in terms of social aggregates, we need to bring discussions around gender aggregates coming in most parameters. And sometimes the data was not giving us that much of a clear signaling, but we hope to get more comments and improve on that. Divya's uh, pursued her degree of economics from the University of Delhi. She did her master's in economics from Delhi School of Economics. Consequently, she submitted a PhD thesis in economics at DSC, which was titled Public Policies for Gender Equality and Childcare. Um, I'll not read much about the thesis as much, but one of the other things that Divya likes to do is, because it mentions in your profile, dance and play sports, and is a graduate in the Indian classical dance form. We are right now in that process at ideas, all dancing shoes in making sure, but I think having Divya anchoring a lot of things which she's doing is great. Dr. Sunil Kaul, who joined us online, is the founder trustee, the AND, an NGO based in Assam. The AND works directly for village development in Chirang district of Bodoland. So we have Dr. Kaul, who again, as I said, as a life mentor, has explained a lot about, and he was with in person during our Solidarity's inaugural event. Right now, he's joining us online, so we let him speak when we ask him to connect. For students, okay, moving on. Aditi, can you hear us? If you can just maybe unmute yourself. Aditi Desai and RN Govind Krishnan. You have anything to say or add? Uh, do you need to meet them as co-host or something?
Can you please go over Aditi again? I think it said
आपको
allow
co-host
speaking.
बनाना होगा ना?
Allow speaking.
Allow to talk. हाँ. And RN Govind Krishnan को भी आप करो ना? Excuse me. RN Govind Krishnan नीचे हाँ. And other thing I'm giving and others are already panelists. Okay, Aditi, can you unmute now? And Arvind, can you unmute now?
Yes. Good morning.
Yeah, Aditi, do you want to sort of start, please, just for roughly around 10 minutes for everyone, all students to give their reflections.
Sure, Professor. So I would firstly like to start by saying that I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity to be here and be a part of this event. So working
Aditi, is your video on?
actually I do not have access to that.
Video,
My,
okay, all right, all right. We'll give you audio. Arvind, if you have access to video, you can switch it on. All right. Otherwise, your photos will be sort of rotating for everyone to see who is who. Go ahead, Aditi. Yeah.
Yes. So I would like to start by talking about my experience with the Access and Equality report in brief, if I may say. So the overall experience working on the Access and Equality report has been extremely enriching. It has been a great learning opportunity overall. Being able to cover 5 broad indicators, which Professor already listed, and then delving deeper into 60 sub indicators and seeing how the inequality or the states in India are faring against each of these indicators is an extremely eye-opening thing, especially seeing how even on the same indicators, the states had very varied results. So across a span of 9 months, approximately, it has been a extremely long and in-depth exercise, if I may say, and the opportunity to being able to work on this and then in the end being able to see it as a report and to see it as something solid is is extremely fulfilling. So overall, I would like to conclude by saying that I was extremely grateful for the opportunity, and I would like to thank Professor Siddhartha Bhaskar as well as Professor Dipanshu for this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Anand, you want to come in, please? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So good morning, everyone. So myself, Aryan, I was part of Jindal School of Government and Public Policy as a master's in economics student there. My currently I am working as a real estate researcher in JLL. So I had the opportunity to work on AEI, and it has been really enriching. It helped me create an research rigor, and the research has led me to understand more about the country, and has let me have a curiosity to enter the field of research. Uh, the To be talking about the report, like when we were doing, we had a tremendous amount of data, and with the help of Professor Bhaskar and Professor Dipanshu, we were able to get to the core issues that were related to the report, and we were uh, thankful enough that we were able to create such an important report in current scenario. So I would like to thank Professor Dipanshu and Professor Bhaskar for helping us create such an index, and thank the center for giving us the opportunity to do so. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Zee Doshi. I'm a third year BA Economics student at Jindal School of Government and Public Policy. I was part of the AEI project, and I enjoyed working thoroughly on updating this index. So, like, I got to understand how both quantitative and qualitative research are equally important in developing such an index. And this professor mentioned about how income is not just a measure for poverty, and how capability approaches and what Amartya Sen had mentioned, researched about earlier, that is also important. So it was a great experience about uh, developing this whole index. And like I got to know about various sources from which we can gather data from, how to collate it, how to organize it, how to make it uniform, and then present it in an infographic form, and then do a lot of literature review, present a narrative behind it. So it was a wonderful experience working on AI project, and I'm deeply grateful to Professor Mohan and Professor Bhaskar in assisting us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zee. So we have certificates for students, physical certificate copies, and let me just end the session today by giving those out, especially Zee is here. Aditi and Arun would have those delivered to them, the respective addresses. Arun has graduated. I want to now start the report presentation. Maybe you could just get the presentation up. We have around 40 minutes of time assigned for this, so so that at any point you want us to come and just let us know. But okay. Record Brian. First things.
Thank you, Dipanshu, and thank you to students. I had a very good experience.
Just a second. See, you can change the slide as Dr. Bhaskar. Or you can hit OK for
As I was saying, I would like to thank the students for assisting me with this report. Without them, it would not have been possible. So I start the presentation. I have 40 minutes. I have around 45 slides. So it's a big presentation. So I may not be able to go through each slide in great detail. But some of the important ones I'll take you through in greater detail. So, as Dipanshu has already introduced the AEI, so I'm not going to go into the philosophical and economic reasons for AEI. I'll basically focus on the methods and the results. What does the data say, and what methods have we used, and what is the performance of the states? So this is how the presentation looks. Why this index, and this is something Dipanshu has touched upon, so I'll not spend too much time on it. What does and does not the index comprise of? This is basically the method how we have calculated the index. How was the index calculated, data collection and methodologies. This we will talk about the data collection. And then basically the major part of the presentation is the findings from the index, and then we compare the index to the earlier index, which is the AEI one. And then we conclude by looking at the limitations of this index and also what could be the way forward. So this index has 5 pillars, and Dipanshu has already talked about the pillars: basic amenities, health, education, socio-economic security, and legal recourse. So, and we divide the pillars into 23 categories, and then we touch upon 60 indicators. So we have collected data on 60 indicators, and if anyone is interested, I have got the indicators at the end. I'm not going to talk about each indicator, we don't have the time for that, but we can discuss the indicators if you're interested. I've got the list at the end to show to you people. So these are some of the indicators. So for basic amenities, we look at the drinking water situation, the sanitation, housing, clean energy, nutrition, and digital access. So one thing we have done in this report is that we have also included the digital access part. Especially after COVID, we thought it was important to talk about digital access, which was not so much covered in the previous report. In health, we have affordable healthcare infrastructure, reproductive healthcare, and digital health. In education, we have vocational training, access to schools, teaching staff, for example, what is the pupil teacher ratio and things, and indicators like that, and digital infrastructure. In socio-economic security, we talk about financial security. So this indicator is a bit different from the earlier indicator. I'll discuss it when we discuss the socio-economic security. In terms of financial security, bank accounts, ATMs, economic security, which is basically decent work, we don't include life insurance there, but some other indicators, and social security like pensions, insurance, etc. In legal recourse, we have timely justice. We basically talk about the courts and also the police. So in legal recourse, we collect data from the India Justice Report, and we talk about what is the performance of the courts and the performance of the police in terms of, let's say the number of judges and the number of the prison occupancy and indicators like that. We also talk about women representation, for example, share of women judges, share of women police, and indicators like that. So we have taken all these indicators, these are the basic sub-indicators, and they comprise of around 60 indicators. And we have collected data from various sources. So I have the list of sources here. So I'm not going to take you through all the sources, but basically some of the important sources are the NSSO survey, the National Family Health Survey, the RBI, the Ministry of the MHFW Family Welfare Ministry. Then you have the India Justice Report, Periodic Labor Force Survey. So we looked at the most current data. So we looked at different surveys and tried to find the most recent data for any indicator. And that is why some of the indicators we haven't used this time because we could not find data for that. For example, in the last AEI, we had the access to good condition houses. That was one of the data which was there in the AEI, in the NSSO, but this time we could not find it. So we have sort of removed it. So I'll go through those changes as well. So data collection happened on all of these 60 indices, and I don't know if you can see the formula there. So what we have done is that for each pillar, we have first normalized the data. We have brought it between 0 to 1. More camera, more players. Thanks so much. For each indicator, we have normalized the data first by bringing it into between 0 to 1. So you can see this is the formula for the basic formula for normalization. The formula is V minus minimum value. V is the value of the indicator for that particular state. So every state will have a value for an indicator, let's say prison occupancy or share of women judges. And that value minus the minimum value for the whole, all the states in India. So we take the minimum value for all the states in India, V minus minimum value divided by maximum value minus minimum value. So what this does, brings the data, the number between 0 and 1. So we have normalized it. So it is important to normalize so that we don't get inflated values. If we don't normalize, some of the indicators are very high value numbers and some of the indicators are percentages. So we have different units for indicators. We have to normalize it in that case. And the normalization for formula of two types, it depends on whether the indicator, whether the higher value of the indicator is a better measure or the lower value of an indicator is a better measure. For example, for some indicators, let's say net enrollment ratio, a higher value is a better measure of performance, right? But for some indicators, a lower value is a better, for example, if you look at the number of, let's say, number of students who leave the schools, number of dropout rate, the annual dropout. If you look at the dropout rate from schools, a lower value is a better indicator. So we use the second formula for the lower value. Once we get the normalized value and then we take the arithmetic mean for each pillar, then we get a sub-index value. And to calculate the AI, we take a geometric mean of the eight of all of the five pillars. So we take a geometric mean. The formula may not be correct here. We have to take the geometric mean, but we take the geometric mean of the all the pillars. So this is the method by which we have calculated. And if there are any questions on the method, I can take it up once the presentation is over. Of the panel discussion, because these methods or these kind of methods are debated, because they have certain limitations with them. I'll discuss some of these limitations at the end. So this is the primary finding from the report. This is our major finding. We have calculated the AEI. You can look at the third column is the AEI numbers. The third column is the AEI number, and then we have categorized the states based on their performance. So what we are saying in this index is that a high AEI number is a better performance, and those states, the states which have a high AEI number are front runners. So that is between, let's say, higher than 0.51. Then the second rung is the achievers. The middle AEI performers are the achiever states. And the third rung is the aspirants, which is the lower AEI number. Now, some of these states are pretty evident. For example, Goa and Sikkim. Goa is a state which is well performing in many indicators. So Goa is the topmost state. And you have Sikkim. Both these states are small states. That is one characteristic of these states. The third state, which is surprising, and we'll see why it is surprising, is Andhra Pradesh. Andhra Pradesh has done very well in the last few years in these indicators. And compared to our previous AEI ranking, Andhra Pradesh has done very, very well this time. Kerala is again a state which is doing well. Tamil Nadu, Himachal Pradesh, Haryana, where we live, is also generally it's a state which is a front runner and is doing very well in some indicators like basic amenities and education. And I'll keep an eye on Haryana when we go through the sub-index as well. Then there are other states you can see. If you look at the lower aspirant states, then again, Bihar is the worst state, and it is generally understood. Even if you take incomes, Bihar is a state which is not so good performing. And then there are some of the northeastern states and other eastern states. So let me show you the map. It will be more clearer if I show you the map. So the states in green are the front runners. So you can see all the southern states are front runners, and two northern states are front runners, Himachal Pradesh and Haryana. The southern states, all this, south is doing really very well in terms of opportunity, providing opportunity to its citizens. South is the front runner states, and two northern states are there. And the one in yellow is the middle one, which is the middle state. We have Rajasthan, you have Chhattisgarh, some of the northeastern states, we have West Bengal, and Punjab and these other states. And if you look at the map of the worst performing states, this is the map of the worst performing states. And it's clear that most of these states are in either central India or in the eastern India or northeastern India. So no state from the west or the south or the north is worst performing. The states which are worst performing are central, east, and some of the northeastern states. Now, we have not gone into great detail of why this is the case because that was sort of, that is something we want to take it up individually. Like we even there have been different theories going around why some states, why the southern states are doing so well. It could be institutional factors, it could be education, and issues like that. But I think maybe somebody else can shed some light on it. We did not go into detail into why this is the reason. These are our findings from the report. So this is a graph which basically we talks about the GSDP per capita, which is the share, which is a measure of income per capita versus the AEI score. So we try to see a correlation between the GSDP per capita and the AEI score, and we find that there is a sort of correlation. States which are low in GSDP per capita also perform low in AEI score, and which is not surprising. And the two states at the top are Goa and Sikkim, which have very high GDP per capita and also have high AEI scores. So these are the union territories. They have also been ranked based on the AEI scores. And you can see that Lakshadweep is the best performing UT. Then you have Chandigarh, Delhi, Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Jammu and Kashmir is the worst performing union territory in terms of the opportunity. These are some of these are the highest score and the lowest score states in each of these pillars. And you have the basic amenities. Goa is the highest, Jharkhand is the lowest. And in education, Sikkim is the highest, Meghalaya is the lowest with 0.22. Socio-economic security, Andhra Pradesh is the highest, Bihar is the lowest. Bihar is the lowest in three pillars, and Jharkhand is the lowest in one. And Bihar and Jharkhand were together, for a long time in the 1990s, 2000 they split. So that region is the lowest for four pillars. And Nagaland is a surprising state in justice. So there are some very surprising figures that we have found, which I would like to point out over time. For example, in justice, Nagaland does the best, but in other pillars, Nagaland doesn't do so well. So what is it that, what are the reasons why in justice Nagaland is doing so well? It's an interesting question. Now we will go to the pillars one by one. I go through the pillars. How much time do I have for questions? 20 minutes, right? So it's a long slide, so I'll maybe skip a few things, but this is the score of the pillars. I don't know if you can see very clearly, but Goa is the best performing state in terms of basic amenities. And then maybe you have Punjab, I think, and Sikkim. Haryana is doing very well in basic amenities. So this is something when I talked to one of my colleagues, she was very surprised, when because she lives in Haryana and she could not believe it. But Haryana is doing well in two pillars and doing pretty well in basic amenities. And then the lowest performing states are Jharkhand, Bihar, Odisha. These states are naturally low performing in most of the indicators, and it's a very open field of study of why this could be the case. And this is for the UTs, and Chandigarh is the best performing in terms of UTs. Then you have Delhi and the other UTs there. So we have brought some indicators here for you to get a feel of on how the states are doing in terms of these indicators. So if you look at housing, which we measure as a percentage of Pakka houses, percentage of Pakka houses, and this is the states, you can see 7% of states have less than 25% houses which are Pakka houses. So and you have around 40 32% of states which are between 75 to 100%, and 15% of states are between 50 to 75%, and so on. So in terms of housing, if we can clearly see that even in today's time, there are few states where the percentage of Pakka houses are very low, and many of these are northeastern states. If you look at the data, some of these states are northeastern states where the percentage of Pakka houses is pretty low. Then in terms of sanitation, we measure by, the availability of clean latrines, and there are two indicators for sanitation. And in sanitation, the performance is pretty good. This is the government data, but the government data says is that the performance is pretty good, around 95, around more than 50% states have a coverage of 95 to 10%, 100%. Right, only 4% states are between 70 to 80%. There is no state below 70%. And this is what the data says. So the performance in sanitation is very good. In digital, education, we measure it by female internet users, male internet users, and mobile users. And we can see that in terms of female internet users, for many states are between 20 to 50%. And in terms of male internet users, the ratio is better. States are between 50 to 60%, and mobile usage is pretty much the coverage is pretty good, 60 to 70% and 70 to 80%. So in terms of mobile usage, states are doing all right. Mobile coverage is very good, but internet usage, especially female internet usage, the data says that the coverage is very low. And you can see the best performing states are also there. The Sikkim is the best performing state for female internet users, and Punjab is the best performing state for male internet users, and so on. Then we have food security, which we measure by National Food Security Act coverage. We have water, we have clean cooking food. So I won't spend much time in food security, as per the data, the coverage is very good. Most of the states are almost 100% covered as per the data. In terms of water also, the performance, I may not have brought the labels here, but the colors basically they are the same. In terms of water, the performance is not as good because 25% of the states don't have less than, I should have brought the label, I think it's 50%, 50 to 70%. So 50 to 70% coverage. But one of the indicators which I don't know, nobody talks about, but India performs very poorly in that indicator is the clean cooking fuel. And I should not say nobody talks about, there was the Ujjwala scheme and things like that. But if you look at the clean cooking fuel, 50% of the states are below 25%. Right? 50% of the states have a coverage of below 25%. So we are saying that in 50% of the states, less than 25% of the population uses LPG and clean cooking fuel, which is a very surprising. And this is after the Ujjwala scheme. The data is for 2020, and the Ujjwala scheme started in 2016. So we can expect maybe 4 years is not such a big time, but still it's a good deal of time to cover the gaps. But in this indicator, many states are not doing well. So we also looked at the urban-rural disparity and how does the urban differ from the rural in terms of basic amenities. And you can see that in some of these indicators there is not much difference between urban and rural, like mobile usage and the percentage of person reported access to improved latrine and things like that, sanitation. But let's say in terms of internet usage, there is a bit of a difference. There is a difference between urban and rural in terms of clean cooking fuel, there is a difference. And in terms of water, there is a good deal of difference between the urban and the rural households. So piped water is the coverage is less in the rural households, and in urban areas it is much different. We also looked at the social groups in India. The others would be the upper caste and the OBC, ST, and SC. Then we looked at whether they differ in terms of basic amenities. And we can see that there are differences. The lower caste groups, the STs are the groups which are the most depraved in India. In most of these indicators, the SCs have the lowest coverage, except maybe one indicator at the top, which is the percentage of households purchased, contributed, new house for the first time, or they have built new house for the first time. So SCs have a decent coverage. But in most of in the last indicator, which is 5 quarter, the percentage of SC is around 20%, which is very low. And the government is trying to bridge this gap, but this is something we can debate and discuss in the panel about how to bridge this gap, how to bring equality into different social groups in India. A big question in now we come to health. The health index for again Goa does the best. Andhra Pradesh is the second state. You have Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Bihar and Nagaland. Bihar and Nagaland are the worst states. For UTs, you have Lakshadweep is doing pretty well. Lakshadweep does well in many indicators. And it's a bit surprising that Lakshadweep is doing so well. It will be interesting to find the reasons why Lakshadweep scores are so good in many of our indicators there. And Chandigarh does the worst in health. Again, it's surprising. It does even Delhi and Chandigarh do worse than Jammu and Kashmir. So again, it's surprising indicator. These are some of the indicators we have brought. Child mortality. Kerala and Goa are the top performing states in child mortality, and Uttar Pradesh and Bihar are the worst performing states. Child immunization. Gujarat and Telangana have 100% immunization coverage, so they are the best performing states. And we have per person government expenditure. You have Andhra Pradesh and Himachal Pradesh lead the way with 1 and 0.0. This is per person government. So this is, I think, expenditure, but 1 and 0.37 for some centers. So health across urban versus rural locations. So you can see that again that in most of these parameters, the urban does very well, except the first two parameters, which is received immunization and the second parameter. And what is the health insurance. Yes, I'm really sorry. It's the health insurance field in which the rural does better than the urban. But the divide here is not so great as compared to the basic communities, where the divide is much greater. Across social groups, we have some differences again, in terms of SC and ST. But if you look at immunization, the tables are reversed, and in ST and SCs have better immunization than some of the other groups, and similarly the other indicators. The divide here in terms of health is not great, and we have to look at the data and see why this could be the reason. In terms of basic amenities, we can see a greater divide even in the social indicators of across. Somebody is speaking. So this is something our students did on themselves in their standpoint at international level. So if you look at the out-of-pocket health expenditures, we know that the percentage of health in our government budget is not so much, around 2 to 3%, and it's very low compared to the needs of India. So in India, the out-of-pocket expenditure or health expenditure is very high as compared to, you can see, the other countries. This, I don't know if this is a part of the report, but this is something which our students did on their own. So it's a interesting data in terms of health. The out-of-pocket expenditure in India on health is much higher than many other countries around the world, which means that clearly that the health infrastructure, public health infrastructure is failing the people, and it needs to improve equity. Given the demographics and incomes in India, it needs to improve. Now we come to education. And in education, Sikkim is the state which is doing the best. And I try to find out why Sikkim is doing so well. And Sikkim is a very interesting state in India. If you look at the times that Sikkim was formed around 1975, Sikkim had one of the lowest per capita GDP in India when Sikkim was formed. And now Sikkim has the second highest per capita GDP in India. And Sikkim has also had a very stable political leadership for a very long time. But the interesting part is Sikkim, which I got from the website. Now it's on the website, so it's a secondary source. But they spend 20% of their budget on education as per their website, as per their party's website, which is really great, and the Sikkim dilemma is very interesting. I tried to find papers on why Sikkim did so well, given that it was so low when it was formed. But I don't think there are any papers, so it is an open question for anybody who wants to take it up, and maybe we can take it up in later in the AEI report. It's a very interesting state, Sikkim. Then we have other states which are self-evident. Kerala is very good in education. Everybody knows that. Himachal Pradesh, Goa, even Haryana does well in education. The education indicator of Haryana is pretty good. So Haryana does well in basic amenities and education. That is what is given it a very good ranking. In other indicators like health, Haryana is not so good. And the worst state is again Meghalaya, Bihar, the same states. For UTs, again, Lakshadweep does very well in education, and the worst state is Jammu and Kashmir. So these are some of the indicators that we use. This is not a full list. If you want a full list, I've got it at the end. So it is the net enrollment rate, and 15% of states have a rate between 30 to 40%, whereas 32% states have a rate between 40 to 50% in terms of net enrollment. Schools with female toilets, Goa is the best performing state here. And worst is Arunachal Pradesh with only 68.8% of school toilets having girl toilets. And in terms of schools with functional computers, 29% of states have a coverage of less than 30%. And you can see, I think, if you look at the states, Punjab here is the best performing state here. In terms of Gujarat and Punjab do very well in providing computers in their schools.
I think your cursor is changing.
Is it possible?
Yeah.
Then we have per capita public expenditure for Pradhan Mantri Gram Digital Saksharta Abhiyan schools with functional internet. So we have taken all these indicators, and you can see that in terms of schools with functional internet, in terms of internet, our schools don't do very well. 20 to 40% of coverage is there, of coverage is there in 43% of states. So in terms of internet, we have to improve a lot. The urban-rural divide in terms of education is pretty clear. You can see the number of schools in rural is very high. Obviously, the rural population is very high, and the urban population, the, the land area is also very high in terms of rural. So number of schools are very high. But if you look at the government and private schools, more private schools are there in the urban region. Almost half of the schools are private in urban, but in rural, private schools are very less. And it is pretty understandable in terms of the availability of incomes in the rural area that the private schools may not want to go into the rural area, and because of other kinds of issues like teachers and things like that. Total in terms of social indicator, social groups, we see that SCs perform the worst in terms of total enrollment. SCs have the lowest, and then SPs, and then the OBCs. We should have got the data for the general category as well for comparison. Maybe we will get this data in the future, but OBCs are better performing as compared to SCs and SPs in terms of social groups. Socioeconomic security here, the best performing state is Andhra Pradesh, and then Goa, Sikkim, and Telangana. The worst performing state is Bihar and Manipur. And the interesting fact about socioeconomic security is not just the ranking of the states, but also the number Andhra Pradesh. If you look at Andhra Pradesh, score is very, very high, 0.70. And the next best is Goa with 0.60, and the next best is Sikkim with 0.50. So Andhra Pradesh is especially doing well in socio-economic security. It's doing far ahead of even the second ranked state. And this is an interesting field of study of why this could be the case in terms of socio-economic security. And, so these are this is the UTs, and the best performing UT is Chandigarh here, then Tawan and Diru. So it's not ranked properly. This is we should have ranked it properly, but best performing is Chandigarh here. And these are some of the indicators we have taken: the availability of ATMs, the digital payment per capita basis, the worker population ratio, and these are some of the indicators we have taken to assess the socio-economic security. And if you look at, for example, the ATM and
What's CRM and WLA? You know, ATM. But,
yeah, these are the cash registering machine, and the WLA is something connected to, I don't forget it.
It's not in your aggregation.
It's not in the application. Okay, we'll put
Only
it.
ATM is there.
Yeah. CRM is cash registering machine. WLA is a machine which can take your deposits and also give you savings. I'm forgetting the full form. But it's a machine. So all three are connected, like they're similar machines, but ATM is the most prevalent out of these three. So we'll put it in the application.
There's just WPR.
Or white labeling. White labeling.
Five people.
Right, one is ATM. No, I don't.
So we also look at Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, and also workers without social benefits and credit of these scheduled commercial banks. We look at these indicators to look at the socio-economic securities, and this is India's standpoint at percentage of employment participation, which is India's employment participation, and this might be the labor force participation rate. And India's labor force participation rate is of course very low, especially if you look at the female labor force participation rate, it's very, very low. And the graph is very, very clear in this aspect, that we have to increase the labor force participation rate. In terms of urban-rural divide, in socio-economic security, the urban-rural divide is not so widespread. The disparity is not so widespread. We can still see that in socio-economic security, in many indicators, the difference is not very high, except for a few indicators. They are almost similar. In terms of social identity, you can see that scheduled tribes, we have the unemployment rate and we have the worker population ratio. I don't think we can see the social groups. Can we see the social groups there? We can't see the social groups. Or it's a vertical axis, right? So I just read, this is prepared for the student. Scheduled tribes exhibit a relatively higher WPR at 51%, suggesting a significant portion engaged in the workforce. Yet an unemployment rate of 18% indicates persistent unemployment challenge. In contrast, scheduled caste face both lower WPR, reflecting a more constrained labor market and elevated unemployment rates. And other backward classes display modestly higher WPR but still contend with considerable unemployment rate of. This is the final pillar, the legal recourse, and Nagaland does the best in legal recourse. Andhra Pradesh and then Telangana, Tamil Nadu, Goa. The worst performing state is Bihar here, and the scores are around, Nagaland has a score of 0.67, and Andhra Pradesh is close second with 0.66. The worst score is 0.36. Again, Lakshadweep does the best here. So this is again another puzzle. Why is Lakshadweep doing so well in union territories? So another good research question for somebody who wants to delve deeper. The score is very good in most of the pillars, and the worst performing state is Daman and Diu. So these are some of the indicators we have used for legal recourse. Prison occupancy, which is the best performing state, is Nagaland here, and the worst performing state is Uttar Pradesh. Population per High Court judge, the best performing state is Sikkim, while Bihar is the worst performing state. Proportion of pending cases, Bihar is the best performer in this particular. So that's again a surprising result. Bihar is the best performer and Sikkim is the worst performer in the Valley of San Francisco. Then we have share of women judges, share of women police, and court hall shortfall. And in terms of women, the best share of women judges, Sikkim is the best performing state, and the worst performing state is Jharkhand. Share of women police, Andhra Pradesh is the best performing state, and the worst performing state is Tripura. And the court was short for the best performing state is Maharashtra, and the worst is Meghalaya. In terms of urban-rural divide, this year taken the population of police station across population per police station across urban-rural locations, and we have ranked different states, and you can see that in the urban areas, the population per police station is much higher. The rural areas in the earlier states like Andhra Pradesh and in Chhattisgarh, in Gujarat. In some states, it's the opposite. The population per police station is high in the rural areas, and you have Madhya Pradesh, you have Bihar, West Bengal are these kind of states. This is a total working police strength. So the police strength which comprises of SC, ST and OBCs. We have only compared SC, ST and OBCs. This is from the India Justice report, and you can see that OBCs are almost half of the police strength in terms of the pride classes, and the SC and ST comprise of other two halves. SC is a bit higher. STs are the lowest, are the group with the lowest amount of police strength, people who are employed in the police force. So this completes our pillars. Now we will compare the two AEIs. So you can see the ranking of states in the two AEIs, AEI 2021 and AEI 2024. The first two states are the same, Goa and Sikkim. The surprising change is in Andhra Pradesh, which was ranked 10 in AEI 2021, and it is now ranked 3 in AEI 2024. And again, fourth is Kerala is constant. Tamil Nadu and Himachal Pradesh have gone down. Similarly, Haryana and Maharashtra have gone up. So you can see the comparisons here. Again, if you go lower down, then Bihar, Manipur, Meghalaya, they have all, they have sort of gone up. Basically, one thing which is important to note here is that some states are on the same rank, and because of that, the total number of ranks have decreased, right? So Bihar is still the lowest in both these indicators, but in this indicator, AEI 24, it shows as at rank 20. Because some states are on the same rank, so we haven't gone till 26. We have stopped at 20 itself. So these are some of the changes that I showed you. This is in terms of union territory, and the Lakshadweep again does very well rank one in this case. These are some of the limitations of the report. So composite indexes, as Devanshu pointed out, have a lot of, there's a lot of debate around the composite indexes, and many people feel that they lack in nuance, like putting everything in terms of numbers and calculating an index, takes out the nuances and it oversimplifies a very complex metric. Inequality is a very complex metric, people might feel that if putting it in terms of one number, bringing a state in terms of one number is just an oversimplification. Another problem which we would like to solve with this indicator is a correlation problem. For example, the indicators may be correlated with each other. They are very similar. So a state doing well in one indicator might automatically do well in the other indicator. There might be a big correlation within the indicators. We can solve this by using principal component analysis in the future reports. Another limitation is that we have collected the most recent data for each indicator, but that may not be from the same year. So number of years vary from 2020 to 2023. For some indicators, we have data from 2020. For some indicators, we have data from 2021, 22. So we are comparing data from different years, even though the changes may not have been so much, but still we are comparing data from different years. So that is another limitation. How does the conclusion is that the AEI is a metric that ranks the different states in terms of the inequality of opportunity on 5 crucial pillars, and we believe that AEI can serve as an important indicator for policymakers, for economists to understand the condition of our states and which states are doing well in what indicators and how to improve the states further and where should they focus, where should they target their efforts on. And AEI would be a continuous exercise over time, and we will keep improving the index and keep including more variables, maybe excluding some variables which are not very important, and develop the index further. Thank you.
Thank you, Siddharth. And I mean, there's a lot to unpack. Of course, as you see, it's a very detailed, comprehensive presentation, and you see the one key area is also to look at middle performers. And one of the things you'll find the states like Gujarat, Maharashtra, those which were doing relatively better off in many pillars and indicators up until what you said early 2000s start sort of changing in performance when you put a historical context to it. One of the things we're looking now to do is have a more spatial focus on certain states. The point that Siddharth mentioned about is why certain states, from the time they're formed till the time they are in the ranking process, are doing significantly better or worse off, and what explains the context to that. I think that requires a lot more of hands-on resources and connections between the different departmental government authorities and things like that. So we are hoping that we raise the resources that are required for specific statewide analysis to follow up from this, because the idea is now to sort of break down into chunks. But the core process of the indice production by its design and structure would continue. What we want to do is every 2 years have the new AEI metric produced. It doesn't make sense to do it annually because you have, as you know, in India, a lot of problems with data collection itself. We've used extensively a lot of proxies for where the census data is. Anika was earlier asking, because it was not available, you have to use other metrics to get a sense of that. We'll open up the panel now. For panelists, I will just request, and we have to stop the sharing presentation. I'll request Mr. Venu to go in first, please, and share your reflections. So just for panelists, I'll request if you could take roughly around 6 to 7 minutes and not more than that for reflections. The reason I'm saying is because we want to then have a wider discussion drawn from what questions you might be asking or your reflections might be, and would also allow us to close in time. So, Mr. Venu, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you, Dipanshu, for inviting me to share my thoughts on this project that you've undertaken. Well, I would say to begin with, I would say it's a great effort on your part and on part of your research team to have developed this composite index uh, uh, across whatever 23 categories, 5 pillars. Uh, and I mean, since I've been in some way, I've been through publication in the wire, etc. I've been associated with uh, your efforts to uh, to to distill and to refine this whole uh, access inequality AEI study. I would I would quickly now suggest suggest some possible improvements that you could make in this study, because uh, and I'd share my own um, thoughts based on my experience of visiting all these states. I've been like covering elections for the last 30 years, and I visited most of these states, and I visit even otherwise. I do speak to bureaucrats, senior ministers, etc. In these states, and I have my own impressions about uh, what's going on uh, in terms of regional disparities, etc. So, which is also part of your, which should be part of your inequality, which indeed is part of your research. So, so I would say, Dipanshu, as you yourself pointed out, and Siddharth also said that, coming up with a single kind of indicator, quantitative uh, indicator on uh, to measure various states across these human development goals uh, in terms of access to education, health, sanitation, etc., basic amenities, etc. You may lose nuances, right? So I don't know whether you remember. I told you earlier that you could do of course it'll need more resources. You could do a combination of a, a well constructed, good methodology based quantitative study, and parallelly you should also do a qualitative study. A qualitative study would involve uh, actually going and talking to various stakeholders, uh, uh, people who deliver services, as in the state uh, uh, agencies, and people who receive services, right? And along some key parameters to begin with, maybe just health, education, sanitation, and 5 or 6 key, uh, maybe on justice. For instance, I'll give you one example. You just have to simply go and ask people, take a sample. How many people actually go and file a police FIR in different states? What kind of trust do they have in the police? That'll give you a massive kind of insight. So so these kind of insights, or how many people, if they have a health problem, for instance, under the Ayushman Bharat scheme of the government, which is being projected as a the big, it's being expanded. Initially started covering 50 crore people based on certain whatever income criteria. In different states, ask people what is the experience of accessing healthcare under the scheme. You'll have fascinating insights. For instance, I'll give you straight away. I'll give you my very tautological, very sort of commonsensical insight. I'll give you. Ayushman Bharat has succeeded much more in the West than in UP and Bihar, because in UP and Bihar there is no supply. So the former Health Secretary Sujata Rao, who Dipanshu, if you recall, she had come on one of your panels. I'd recommended to you that you should get her. She's written a book on healthcare, and you'll find that access to healthcare is clearly far more in the south than in the than UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh. You know, the states, and which is reflected in your overall ranking. So your overall ranking do not surprise me at all. So you year after year, you may keep sort of doing a quantitative study. You will keep getting these rankings. Nothing would change. So how do you refine the study? So now then you have to go to the next level and start asking questions as to why is this happening. So the why question, which Siddharth also in the course of his presentation, he kept saying we have to study why, we have to understand why, we have to understand why. So I think you need to devote some resources to figure out why. I think why is why is very important. For instance, I can straight away give you one example. You know, the same policy which is implemented at the national level is uh, is implemented, say a poverty reduction, Manrega. Now, isn't it counterintuitive that Manrega has far more takers in the south than in, say, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, etc.? It is very counterintuitive. But why does that happen? Because purely because administration governance better in the south. You know, they are much better at building the list of Manrega. People who, since it's a legislated rights-based work kind of project program, right to work program. So is the case with health, education. You just look at supply of education in UP and Bihar. So I think you need to build a qualitative. What I'm getting at is, please build a qualitative index on supply, because supply is very important. Health, education, sanitation, etc., etc. You know, you clean water. As I said, access to justice. I think some resources will have to be devoted to that, and that will give you that will really add. I mean, your basic quantitative study would be would form the base, and over and above that, the qualitative index will really add a very, very interesting dimension to answer many questions. Which you are at the moment you're just raising. Why Lakshadweep? I personally feel Lakshadweep is an outlier, so you should not bother about Lakshadweep, because Lakshadweep has a strategic importance. So the government does a lot of things there. So you can imagine that a lot of things happen there because of the government's extra attention, states attention, and low population, etc. जो भी है. So I would recommend that you focus now much more on the northern belt, Hindi heartland states, which are almost like permanently, showing in the index. They're not, they're static. They're not moving up. And the southern and western states are up there. So we need to now study as to this interregional kind of access gap. Why is it happening? In this context, I would say two things. You need to, as far as data is concerned, I'm sorry to say that this government has messed up our data system so badly that you are having to, I can see from Siddharth, you're having to go for data from all kinds of sources. But we are hoping that some things will improve with the promise now by this government. They have not conducted a Sensex in 10 years now. It's got delayed by 3 years. Now they are talking about doing a proper socio-economic and caste census. That will be a mine of data for you. That will actually really show you, at a granular level, what kind of access people have, especially in the poorer states, where human development is really, really sort of, lagging. Also, please remember, keep track of some macroeconomic trends, as Professor Santosh Mehrotra has pointed out, which people now recognize. As government's own data shows that some 6 crore people have moved back from urban to rural areas after 2020. You know, the acceleration happened after COVID. So there's a massive movement back from into rural areas. It's a kind of very odd structural kind of reversal in the earlier development, where actually people were from 2005 to 2012, 13. There was a big movement from rural to urban, even in terms of employment, etc. So, in absolute terms, rural workforce actually decreased in that period. Now, for some reason, at that time, what I mean, there's data to show how many people moved from seeking work from rural to urban. Now, data shows that 60 million people have moved back to rural areas. Now, this will completely change the whole dynamics of how people are accessing all these facilities, parameters that you have built. So I think that is something that we need to sort of keep an eye on. I'm just giving a broad kind of indicator. So therefore, I think this, thankfully, after census and after the socioeconomic caste survey, if this government is true to what it is indicating, that they would do a serious study of the caste, and within the caste, access to various amenities, and their present status, economic as well as social status, in terms of pakka houses, or what kind of, whether to have a piped water, clean water at home, whether they have a two-wheeler, access to education. A lot of the, if this government does it seriously, you get a mine of data, and I think you'll be able to refine your study even further. But I'll end by saying that I think you need to devote some resources to a kind of qualitative indicator also, and then study the two together. I'll just end with one observation. Now, this is purely my intuitive and anecdotal. If Northeast is being seen as, in quantitative terms, is being seen as, say, worse than, say, UP or Bihar, or some of these North Indian states, I think a qualitative study will give you a different view of North, because Northeast has a lot more on many parameters. I think they are way ahead of Bihar and UP. I mean, this is purely my intuitive, whether in terms of gender equality, in terms of education, in terms of so let's see. I mean, I would wait for a qualitative study on this. Thank you, Dipak. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. So I'll respond, and we collectively respond to panelists and observations more towards the end. But right now, we're just making a note of what has been said. I'm bringing in Dr. Sunil Kaul, because I know, in interest of time, just who's also joined online. Dr. Kaul, can you hear us? You'll have to unmute, or allow to speak. You might have to just see on the project. I think there's some questions so we'll take questions from the audience, and those who have joined online towards the end. Attendees में देखिए सुनील कॉल का mention होगा, नहीं है? नीचे हाँ, तो आप, मैंने इसीलिए आपको बोला था ना, कैसे ज्वाइन करेगा कोई? I think you should be able to now, Dr. Kaul, be able to unmute and put your video on.
इसको प्रेजेंटर बना दीजिए आप।
वीडियो एक्सेस नहीं है इसमें।
वीडियो एक्सेस नहीं,
जो पैनलिस्ट है सर उन्हीं को एक्सेस।
तो वही तो पैनलिस्ट है।
नहीं सर, वो अटेंडेंस में।
हाँ,
अटेंडेंस में।
हाँ, उनको आप राइट से बोलना भाई। मैं 2-3 बार इस विषय पे आपसे बात करी। You should be able to now see him the above. Join the live and then let him join back again.
Dipanshu,
Yes, sir.
Dipanshu, can you give me 30 seconds? I forgot to make a very important point.
Yeah, go
which
ahead.
you may also.
Till the time you're figuring it out.
Yeah. So Dipanshu, please, when you look at inter-regional kind of the growing inequality between the south and the north, especially the what I call the cow belt. Please remember, I had spoken to the finance minister of Tamil Nadu some time ago, and he said he gave an interview to actually to The Wire, and he said very strange. He said that although the south earns 100, the south earns what it earns 100 rupees in taxes. It contributes 100 rupees to the central kitty in taxes and gets back 35 rupees. Whereas states like UP contribute 35 rupees and get back 100 rupees, right? So he said that there's no problem. The better off states should support the worse off states, and the gap should reduce over the years. The gap, Human Development Index or per capita GDP gap should reduce. But he said the per capita GDP gap is not reducing. It's not converging. It's actually diverging over the last many years. So this is a very serious, I thought, development, and we need to go into why is this happening. Because if you look at, say, India and US, I mean, I'm taking at a global level, it is very clear that the per capita between US and India is converging. I mean, it's not even at a slow pace, but at least it is that directionally it's converging. But between, say, UP and Tamil Nadu, his point, directionally diverging, So there is there's a governance, there's a major governance issue. So a qualitative study will bring out that governance issue. Thank you.
Yeah. No, that's a point that PTR had made in the summer when we got a chance to interact with them. I've also made a list of few project options in mind to conceptualize, which will bring out this in more play. Dr. Kaul, please proceed. Just again, in the interest of time, I'll just let everyone respond first, and then we can expand.
Yeah, thank you so much. Firstly, I mean, I've been listening all through, just couldn't connect in, and I couldn't see a way of unmuting myself. Yeah, I think I'm happy that Mr. Venu just brought that in, and that's one of the things which I really wanted to point out. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, and we can see you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the good things is that while I mean these indices are very good, and comparative also helps people econ. To me, certain things, I mean, the way same as Mr. Venu, our understanding of various states and how they function, and how, at least from my angle, where the poor people or tribals access, there have been some places where I've been really surprised. And being from the Northeast, I can understand some of them, but not some others. But I'm very happy that, I mean, you've given probably equal weightage to the legal and justice system, because I feel that's a very big, in the long term, that's one of the first things which we need to do to make India a better place. And so the more we can do it, I mean, I don't know why Nagaland is probably the first, but maybe it's also, I would say that, your village justice systems there are far better than, the legal systems that we are talking about. And I don't know how really you came up with that, because if it's only about how many people per population there are, well, I think Nagaland has the highest amount of government servants per unit population anywhere in the country. So in that sense, yes, if that is a major indicator of how you scored the justice system, it probably has become the first. But I think I just wanted to bring out 1 or 2 points here, because sometimes I'm a bit skeptical about data and the reasons for it. One or two, I mean, and I'm very happy that Mr. Venu just triggered me on certain things. It's like whenever I ask people when they come to me in the village and they ask me for helping out, and whether it's a rape case or whether somebody has stolen somebody's cattle and something, and when I tell them, why don't you go to the police? The first answer and universal answer is, sir, we are very poor. We don't have that kind of money. right? So that's my number one thing, and that could be a very good way of finding out how accessible really things are. Two, when you looked at out-of-pocket expenditure and being a doctor, public health person, when you're looking at out-of-pocket expenditure, very often nowadays, because the Ayushman card now, you can be using the Ayushman thing in the government as well. And many of the private people are dropping out far higher in the last few months than earlier, because their payments have not been made for 6 months, 1 year, those kinds of things. And whenever the payments come, they don't even make out, 30%, 40% cuts of whatever bills they're presented. And I'm not trying to say that that's wrong, but I think, the private sector has got used to inflating bills or, charging too much. So maybe the government of India is cutting that down. But the whole point is that the private sector is not very happy doing it. So when we look at access as an indicator by seeing how many Ayushman cards have been distributed, it doesn't do justice with the accessibility of poor people. I mean, in the last 3 days, I think met about 100 Ashas, who are working with people, and they constantly say that when they take their patients with Ayushman cards, one is most of the hospitals earlier have got disempaneled, and those which continue to be empaneled are refusing to operate. So where do we take them? Right. So the Ayushman card itself is not a very good indicator of this thing. Though I must admit that compared to earlier, for hospital admissions, the out-of-pocket expenditure has decreased. But very often these days, I'm also noticing that the out-of-pocket expenditure, simple things like cesareans, for example, that we can take. The out-of-pocket expenditure for the same procedure in a government hospital comes out to be higher than that in the private hospital. So these are again, counterintuitive to many of us. But what happens is that in the private hospital, there are package deals. Whereas in the public sector, when there's poor governance and people are making charges, the charges can be for anything. So when you enter, they'll quote you a charge and then they'll say, this is also required, that's also required. So your expenditure keeps going up. And so out-of-pocket expenditure, unless we do interviews of people really on the ground, we are unable to get in, and government data obviously will not come up very well.
Yeah,
Third,
I agree.
The third observation, I think, would be on, when you were talking about immunization, insurance. Obviously, because when we are taking health insurance as Ayushman or, immunization, which is done mainly by the government, and we are not picking up the data from the cities, from the private sector. If you're not picking up the data from the private sector, obviously we'll see that the rural areas are doing better in both immunizations and insurance compared to the urban areas. But that's because the government data out there is either not there, or the government's facilities for these two things are not as readily available to them. So immunization in the private sector would be happening in the urban areas, and we don't have that data. Similarly, Ayushman cards are being distributed mainly in the rural areas. They're not really available for urban areas. So it doesn't, to me, it's not very surprising, the data which is there. Again, one of the other things which I feel we have to get, as we go further, how do we, improve the thing? Because I've been working in Assam for a long time, Northeast as well. The quality of government data itself is very, very suspect. And because there's no cross verification to it. So the SRS sometimes, it picks up things well. But when you're looking at government data, which is coming through a management system, so there are two observations that I've usually had. One is, say, if I have to look at just maternal mortality in a hospital, or if I have to look at, say, malaria deaths in a particular district, the districts which have the best governance have the worst data. Because the others are not performing, there's nobody on the ground who is actually doing anything. And so the data is also not being collected. Last, similar thing for what happens is that because nobody's checking the data, very often for example, the dropout rate, the school enrollment rate that you were talking, there was a 75% dropout rate between the first standard and the second standard for many, many years in Assam. Till somebody like myself pointed out that the second year enrollment rate is matching. Sorry, just give me a second. Right. Sorry, terribly sorry. So, Where was I? Sorry.
Second year dropouts.
Yeah. So the second year enrollment rate in the children in the entire state was very close to the birth rate of Assam, whereas the primary or first standard enrollment was 3 times higher because there was an incentive to the entire system to inflate that number. It's 3 times as high. So we need to do some number crunching. Recently, I was with the government and I was noticing that they were claiming that 95% of all deliveries were taking place in the institutions. But when I look at all the deliveries combined together, they make up for only 1% of birth rate, whereas the birth rate of Assam is 2%. So what's happening to 50%? We don't know. So, I mean, so there is a need for if you're looking government data, we also have to see whether that data has been well recorded or not. So these are things which will probably, as we go further, we'll probably have to start picking up data and keep, I think, doing some value check to it, whether it's really concordant with the other data which is coming in. Yeah, I think I'll just rest at that for the time being.
I think thank you, Dr. Kaul. I'll turn the attention back. I think now those present in person here, these Dr. Singh and Divya. So, however you want to do this.
Thank you very much. I first want to congratulate the team that's worked on this index. I happen to know that it's a lot of hard work. And the first benefit of this is for the students who are engaged in this kind of work, because your involvement in this and coming out with a report like this inspires other students, motivates them to engage in this kind of an exercise. And collating data all across the country for all the states and union territories from multiple sources, and following a formula is a big task. And so to accomplish that, regardless of anything else, there's an intrinsic value to taking up this work. It may not have quite the instrumental value that we want many of these studies to have. Dipanshu mentioned that I've often remarked that producing indicators, index, human development reports, and so on has become an industry in itself, and the end in itself. And as in my long years in the development business, I've noticed that we come up with a number of techniques, participatory action research for one, train a lot of people in that, and then find that no one actually uses it. And the problem really is with government, because no matter how wonderful there may be NGOs like ANT in the Northeast, Dr. Sunil calls extraordinary institution, making a difference to the lives of some people, unless the government comes into the picture and does the right thing, the lives of the majority of the people will not be improved. Governments are still, it used to be said by Professor Raj Krishna, who was an economist in Jaipur, and Rajni Kothari after him, that government of India is knowledge proof, like watches are waterproof. They won't look at this report. And we, in fact, a lot of my time and effort was spent with these human development reports. We got some good outcomes in the sense that in order to do a human development report for the states of India, we started a project with the Planning Commission. Dr. Rohini Nair was in charge of it. And we got all the states to produce a human development report. There's one interesting report on Sikkim by Mahinder Lamba of JNU, interestingly, the HDR. And then we went on to say, okay, now if people got so enthusiastic about it that the state said, oh, we'll now do a district human development report. So a lot of funding was provided to do district human development reports, but then you had a problem that how do you calculate for the human development index? You need to know the GDP of the state, That's okay, but GDP of a district is more complicated. And I remember that Vinod Vyasulu and Dr. Rohini Nair developed a technique to estimate what might be the GDP of a district for the district human development reports. And so we did all this, and then, it started with the Madhya Pradesh Human Development Report. That was an initiative of an NGO, Sandeep Dixit, and an NGO, Sankeet, started it. And at that time, it seemed very promising because.
Uh,
I told him, so he said, "वो Fisher बन गया." तो मैं antibiotic now,
Yeah.
antibiotic based.
Yeah, good.
So when that report was published, the first one, Mr. Vijay Singh was the chief minister and the editor. One other major decision we made was, since government is important and necessary, that the human development reports must be government owned, hoping that that would make bureaucrats and the government take the report seriously. That was a hope. It's a hope that's belied, but it was a hope then. And so Madhya Pradesh came out very badly on all of the human development indicators in its first report. And the BJP in the opposition slammed the government of the day, saying that you've been in power for so many years in this state, and look at this pathetic state of on your own admission, by your own report, things are so bad in Madhya Pradesh. And the Vijay Singh said the first step towards addressing a problem is to first recognize there is a problem. And this report, at least honestly and transparently, says there is a very serious problem in Madhya Pradesh. Now, that seemed like a good start, that governments then will say, whatever you're showing by way of this kind of data and evidence will spur them into some action. That was the hope. And so we invested a great deal of time and effort in that, and the government stopped. There was one little division in the government that would work on human development reports. They were good enough to at least let academics come and do the job, so that the objectivity of the report to some extent was protected. It was not like administrative data that government often hooks up, for it. There's been some changes in the attitude of statistical officers at the district level, because these people were not considered important. In fact, many of them said they'd never ever met the deputy commissioner. He didn't call them for any meeting or anything like that. They were just paid by the government. And so, they didn't know what use there was for the work they did. And a telling example of this was, I remember sitting with the planning secretary, Anuradha Rajivan in Tamil Nadu, working on the Tamil Nadu report. And she had a group of people who had done the livestock census in Tamil Nadu. And when she looked at the aggregate data on livestock, she found that Tamil Nadu had a lot of camels. And she said this couldn't possibly be correct. Because Rajasthan, I understand there be camels, but how can there be so many camels? So the officers were quite honest. They said, firstly, madam, you put a column for camels in the survey. Now, if you thought Tamil Nadu, camels are not important for Tamil Nadu, why have a column for camels? Then once you put a column, then, we have to say, how are we to figure out how many camels? Maybe there's a circus in the locality that has 2 or 3 camels. So all of us have taught in the same way, and we put 2, 3, and you added them all up and you say there's a very large number of camels. But the more important point is they didn't know what is the use of this data. That's the point. If you inform people who are collecting data that this data is important, it's useful, it's going to make a difference, it will affect policy, and you are important people in the business, in government, then there is some chance you'll get some more honest data. If they are treated as very low level people of no importance and just to do this job and given schedules and asked to fill them up, they cook up the data, and because they don't see the point of what it is their work. So recognizing that data collection is absolutely important, that the people who do that work are given a sense of, purpose, meaning, respect their professional integrity, and give them the kind of prominence that they deserve. We don't do that. With the result, much of the administrative data that's collected in the system is all cooked up. It has no bearing on reality. So we have that problem too. And since the last 10 years, even the first rate systems that we've had with the Central Statistical Office and the National Sample Survey have been undermined. The results have been inconvenient. The Niti Aayog has said, oh, there are methodological flaws, so we are not going to publish them. And this has left a big hole in knowing what's happening. We don't know what's the state of poverty in this country, because the kinds of data that we used to get on the basis of which year on year one could make some estimation of what's happening, now nothing is reliable. Government claims poverty is reduced, but others would say no, it hasn't. And for a country that pioneered the statistical system for the United Nations, set up, helped the United Nations have a national income accounts in all the countries that to some extent is comparable. For having done that kind of path-breaking work with Mahalanobis and Pitambar Pant and others, to have reduced that statistical office of India to the state it is now in is a crime. And so we hope, as Venu said, maybe there'll be a change of mind, and this present administration would do better. Now, with respect to this one, I mean, I've been going through. One other point I wanted to make is in the references, there's an omission of a report that the General School of Government and Public Policy and a team led by Rajiv Malhotra produced. It's called the India Public Policy Report. That's the first one. And interestingly, that report also Sikkim came out on top. But that, Rajiv Malhotra couldn't continue with it because of the data problem. The data sources on which the first report relied on were discontinued by the government and not released. And therefore you couldn't come up with a subsequent one. But again, at that time, I gave a lot of advice as to how that can be improved. Now, there are some issues, like was pointed out, that require revisiting. For instance, the India Justice Report produced by the Tata Trust is very good. So let it be on its own. I mean, there's no need to take that data and bring it in here. I mean, most of your data on what you've got for access to justice is from the Justice Report. Save yourself the time. Also, it's not clear to me that that's so important. I mean, from the point of view of the well-being and welfare of people. Most people in this country would avoid the formal justice system. Most people, if possible, will avoid wanting to go to the police. And then you may get distortions, like in the Rajiv Malhotra report. The Northeast came out doing well in what he called the rule of law index. But that's because you have a very large number, it's a very militarized state. You've got a large number of police, paramilitary forces, and so on. And then you take a ratio of the police to the population, that ratio would be extraordinarily good as a ratio. But that just means that it's a state where the population is living in insecurity and fear. And therefore, it's not a good indicator. Number of police and necessarily is not a good indicator. So we need to think of some of these things. And so you need to now, I think, focus on a few things where you notice some of these, like Sikkim is a very small state. It's an outlier in that sense, just as Venu mentioned, that should be this. But we need to look at some of these. Why has anything happened in Andhra that's made it change? I think an effort directed in that, including some quantitative research, would be meaningful. And so so the prize would go to the effort in producing this. But I'm very skeptical that that's going to be of any use to anyone, especially government, which needs to take notice of this, right? And in our experience now, government doesn't take notice of these things. And so spending a lot of effort in putting together data and coming up with indices. The other point, of course, is the indices, once you come to professional statisticians, they say, an unweighted index is not to be taken seriously. I mean, because you have to have different weights. In some states, in Canada, for instance, employment may be a more important requirement than access to health and education, where there's been considerable progress. So an index for Canada would have to give more weight to employment because you more or less got where you want to be with respect to the other human development indices. So, but then, when this point was made by Amartya Sen to Mahbub ul Haq, when the first human development report was published, Amartya Sen said, nobody will take this. You asked me, Sudhir Anand and Amartya devised the Human Development Index. And they came up with this as a feasible formula, in a similar formula to the one that's used here. But Amartya Sen said that, this won't pass muster with statisticians. And Mahbub ul Haq's response was that the gross domestic product is a crude and vulgar index. And people take that seriously. And that talks about how well an abstract entity like the economy is doing. And at least this one focuses attention on how well people are doing. So even though it's a flawed index, it's all right to have it. Again, tragically, the Human Development Report and UNDP have been in the business for so many years. And yet, all that we hear about from governments is economic growth measured in terms of GDP. And worse, when UNDP allocates its resources to developing countries, which is what it's set up to do, it still uses per capita GDP to allocate those resources. It doesn't use the Human Development Index. Why? There's a political reason. Now, China would, has a very high Human Development Index and would ought to be a net contributor to UNDP rather than get any grant. But the Chinese attitude is, even if it's a very small amount of money, it's money and we want it. And if you keep the formula as per capita GDP, China gets a share of the resources, and India had the same argument. Of course, India's Human Development Index is worse, and if it had been the Human Development Index had been used, maybe we'd have got more of the UN's resources than we do. But this is the point that an important institution like the United Nations produces an index and then doesn't live by it. Then somebody would say, physician, heal thyself. First, adopt your own advice. Follow the advice you're giving to countries, that it's the well-being of people that matters and not so much the well-being of some abstract entity called the economy, right? So we have all of that. So what I'd say the great merit in this exercise is involving us all in this. And so we are in a university, and our primary role is to train people and with skills and capabilities. More than that, an enthusiasm for wanting to find out what's the state of affairs, what's an outlier, why is this so, what might be an explanation for it, and then to have a whole lot of research questions that come up that we can address. So that's important. It's important also for the public to know, and we should be thankful that there is such a entity like the Wire that reaches out to a lot of people online and they read, summaries of this kind of a report, that's also a plus, and we should be grateful to Venu and the staff of Wire for, giving the space for publicizing this. So I'd say that the next step should be to kind of, reduce the number of indicators. I would see in this country, the large majority of people, as in many countries, developing countries, go to the non-state sector for justice. They want to avoid the courts. You take somebody to court in order to harass that person. And there are a large number of people who are known as Mukaddama Bazis in India, who use the courts to, as an act of revenge. I'm insulted by you, so I will file a case against you. I will lose it in the district court. I'll have to spend a lot of money on lawyers myself. I will still do that and drive you to the High Court, and I'll still not be satisfied. I'll spend a lot of money myself and drive you to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court seems to be entertaining all kinds of appeals instead of being a constitutional court. And the biggest litigator and the ones who never accept a decision of a lower court is the government. State governments will never accept a decision that's adverse. Why? Because the bureaucrat who has the right to appeal would fear that if he did not appeal, when there was a right to appeal, his boss would question him and say, why didn't you appeal? You should protect the revenues of the state. And we've had instances where, 17 years later, a 10,000 rupee fine was not paid by the Haryana Road Transport Corporation to a woman who fell down because the bus moved while she was entering the bus. 17 years, and the Supreme Court says, how much in legal fees has the state government spent to save the 10,000 fine, right? That's a state of affairs. So I don't know whether, this as a part of the welfare of people, we need to take our justice system in the state that it is in. Now, if you find out how much of the non-state institutions people are using, how much of customary law is what, the Northeast is fantastic in that respect, because they have these local institutions that administer justice. In all other places, the government-sponsored Nyaya Panchayats have failed. But in the Northeast, because of their customary practices, having more of a matrilineal stroke matriarchal system, things are a little different, and also in terms of literacy and so on, thanks to the Christian missionaries and the education of people in Nagaland, Meghalaya, and so on. Literacy levels are much higher. Gender discrimination is much lower. So those are the sorts of things that we find as a special category, right? We can't compare that with mainland India strictly. So I'd say that we need to sit down and figure out how to maximize the impact of what we do. First impact is our own learning. That's very important. Secondly, to weed out some of the things that in the end don't seem to make sense. Number of police population and cases that are pending. The cases are pending because government is the biggest litigant and continually appeals. It doesn't accept any decision of any lower court until the Supreme Court finds a time to give some final version. And the Supreme Court's decision is final. It's not infallible. It could be wrong at the end of that. And so the sense of justice that, I think you need to have a separate project to capture that. So I'd say you take it out of this index and concentrate on the important things that are vital to human development, which is, employment, health, education. And then I would again underline the importance of doing some qualitative studies and actually talking to people. Now that's more expensive. It's more difficult to do. It may not be very representative of the entire sample for the country, particularly if you want to disaggregate it by population groups like scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, OBCs, and so on. the sample size would have to be much larger. That's more difficult, but I think nonetheless there is enormous value that could be added by doing some qualitative surveys that may corroborate or contradict a quantitative finding. And so that would be a good thing to get onto. Thank you.
I think one of the fascinating things of listening to Professor Sudarshan is I'm reminded often of reading of trying to do that in whatever little free time I get early in the morning is on Shankaracharya's reasoning of non-duality and duality, of what is the virtual or what we call today as the Brahman, the ultimate reality of non-dual existence, and the conventional intersubjective understanding of what empirical reality seems. And the knowledge of the truth seems to oscillate between these two. So you have to pick some things in the comments and being able to interpret it. I think there are some fascinating points that have come across from all three interventions. There is a conscious effort, and the reason I paused right now before asking Dr. Singh and Divya come in is there's a conscious effort now to move into the qualitative trajectory because institutionally the center had no resource identity to take that forward. Now, I think as an office and with ideas, there is a lot more of that space that can go, which is why we made this more as a collaborative event. But as you see, most people attending this are all students in the center who are engaged in largely qualitative work. And what we are now doing with this project is that you have a quantitative foundational base of state level performance indicators. Now, what you need to do is break this conversation down to the initiatives you have, like Aman and Harshita look at Azad talking about marginalized communities and talking about access debates there. Then you have a journal team. Then you have Swabiman, which is looking at mostly gender issues. So they're now, what they do is over the year, they break the report down and engage in interpersonal dialogues in trying to make sense. The other larger utility right now we're driving of the report, and there is a lot more of response now from political leadership, which is taking this very seriously, mostly from the India bloc. So I had a brief, I'm mentioning this on the record now, a brief meeting with Akhilesh Yadav, UP, and one or two representatives in MP and who have taken the study a lot more seriously. I think what we need is one or two more rounds of iteration for this to have an identity of its own. That's what Dr. Maitri Shatak and others have recommended, that the moment index is produced, 2 or 3 or 4 iterations, is sort of a credibility that you're developing over time. What they are looking for is specific pillars-wise insights on policy solutions. So like on basic amenities and education health, there's already a lot that's happening, and social security. These two are of most interest. You're right that legal recourse is not the sort of primary engine driving indice formulation, but it is also true that everybody's saying you should have it in there, which you don't make it a study of its own and have a separate focus. So I will talk about these things. Dr. Singh, please, up to you, and then Divya.
Right, thanks. Let me also congratulate the team put the report together. The utility of the report in the sense of academic exercise, I think is quite clear. The research that we learn, the approaches you take, how you deal with data, and the benefit students get, that's clear. But I think we need to go beyond that one. So that's one good already achieved goal or objective. The Professor Sudarshan spoke at length about the Human Development Index and the creators, and Professor Marx is here as well. And we have spent a lot of time on this issue. Let me just take that as a point of departure quickly. You know, when I had a discussion with Sudhiran and changing the HEI. Early in the days, I was at UNDP in New York in those days. And I said to him, look, the HDI is great, but should it not be an SHDI? That is to say, a Sustainable Human Development Index. And his immediate retort was, what policy question will that answer? And I said, well, the policy question is obvious, isn't it, Sudhir? It will answer the policy question when we have improvements in the HDI, at what cost to the natural systems of the planet? So he stopped for a minute and then he said, you know, that makes a lot of sense, but let's not do it, please. Because we are having enough trouble getting the HDI accepted as it is. So if you make it more complex, we have less chances. Jolly could not understand sustainability, so he did not respond to that, Richard Jolly, but at least Sudhir did. Now, I made that as my point of departure because, as Sudarshan was saying, we have learned a lot about this index and indices from the HDI. One would have hoped by now we would still not be just critiquing GDP per capita, but rather using HDI or any other alternative, but we are not. We are still busy critiquing GDP per capita. Look at all the recent papers. They are hardly referring to HDI now. So even academically, it's not making much contribution. So what do we learn from that? I want to spend the 5 minutes I have, 5 or 6, and try to answer the question of how might we make policy impact? How might we get there? So the first big point that I have learned from my 30 years of trying to make policy impact from data is how do we first craft evidence-based policy? What constitutes evidence-based policy? And as some of you might know, my more recent work is to look at data, to look at information, at knowledge, but I've gone the extra step of wisdom. And how do we get that into the evidence-based package that can contribute to policy? So that's the first point. But that's more conceptual. The first practical point is, who is asking for this data? Who is asking for this index from the policy world? Now, we can all argue advocacy is critical for policy change, and maybe so. But I would say that maybe if we had spoken to the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, or the Ministry of Rural Development, or the Ministry of Urban Affairs and Housing, prior to this work, even if you did exactly the same thing, but if they felt that this was being discovered there and not here, your chances of uptake become much greater. So this first conversation with the policymaker, I think, is critical. When we did work on participatory policy stuff and generating all this PRA and all this participatory research data that Sudarshan loves so much, how do you get it into policy? A few places where we had success, we took the senior policymakers to the ground and let them engage in the PRA themselves, and they then began policy uptake. Look at what worked in the UK. How did they get DFID policy research into the DFID policy process? Same process. And there's a book out on how do you do that. So that's the first big point I want to make, that we know something about how to get evidence, indices, indicators into policy. So the next big point is about, can we still learn something about the HDI process and use it in this process that you have, which I think is great. And I know you will get lots of recommendations on how to change it. And you have to think about what resources you have and which partners you need. So the first big point, again, recommendation is, whatever you want to do extra, don't try to do it with the existing team. Try instead to look at strategic partnerships, whoever that might be. And one of the partners might very well be the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy. And I'm so happy that some students from our school are engaged, but more engagement might be helpful. Next point I would add would be, what I didn't see in the report was, could we not have had, for the 10 or more studies in India on inequality to access that has already been done? A short summary, a page or two, it gives us the sense that hardly anything has been done. But I did my only quick review, quick search on the web, and I find there are at least 10 studies. They're varying quality and so on, but let's have a quick review. So we see that it's not starting from scratch. And also they might have failed to anchor it in policy. But a little conversation on how do we anchor this in the capabilities, functionings, and freedoms debate that Sam spent his life doing, and many of us still find useful, might also be relevant. Now, to wrap it up, 3 other points. One is, if we anchor this in the sustainable livelihoods conversation, maybe the policy implications become clearer very quickly. And that's a framework that has been already worked out, as well established, and we might find it something easy to use and move forward on that. The legal empowerment is the next issue that I will say. And while Professor Sudarshan might be right on justice as a punitive issue, I don't take that approach at all. Law and justice is critically important for people's livelihoods, the positive side of the law, which we forget. So, yes, poor people only encounter the law and they have to be punished for something. It's true. But they need to encounter the law because it helps them make their livelihoods better. Security of tenure, property rights, labor rights. How do they get protection from domestic bosses? Because maids and housekeepers don't have protection. Informal labor, social security for old age when you are in the informal sector. And one can go on and on. So that I will argue strongly for maintaining that component, but focusing it on the livelihood system of the people. Then the issue that you wouldn't let me go if I didn't mention the word complexity. I know you like that one. And the reason I mention that is when we have differential access, inequality in access, it affects, one would assume, inequality in outcomes. A lot of work has been done on the inequality of outcomes. The world is flooded with that. Those inequality of outcomes feed back into the access inequality. And that dynamic interaction, a word or two on that interaction will be the complexity bit that I would add. Every one of us here, I'm sure, is tempted to answer the question why, but so does, and I agree, we will get into a forever debate on why this state is better than that state and so on. We don't even know, and maybe the question you need to answer in the report is, which comes first, development or reduction of inequality to access? One might automatically assume that reducing inequality of access could lead to development. Some others will say, including Asimov and Robinson, that maybe it is development which comes first. I leave it at that.
Okay, Vivian, please.
First of all, thank you so much for providing this opportunity to share my feedback on the report, and congratulations to the entire team on doing this rigorous work, because one can imagine the rigor that is involved in the collection of data from any number of sources and trying to just not collect the data, but also sort of trying to make sense of data that we collect from various government departments and government sort of websites. A lot has already been said by all the other panelists in terms of the points that I wanted to also sort of make. So I will just stick to the points, very specific comments or feedback in terms of the index that has been created. But before that, I do want to emphasize on the point that Professor Naresh just made on the sustainability aspect of the index. And this is one of the most important comments that I wanted to add, that maybe when you're looking at the 5 pillars, one of the pillars is the access to basic amenities. I believe that the access to clean air in simple words, like just simply something as simple as access to clean air or maybe some indicator of a clean environment that could be included in this sub-pillar or sub-index to make it more, to make it more indicative of a sustainable sort of inequality index. That's one of the comments that I wanted to add. The second thing that I want to build on to Professor Naresh's comment is to, and maybe it has been echoed by other panelists as well, that maybe you may want to rethink about the number of sub-indicators that you are looking at within each sub-index. Too many indicators saying one thing or the other about that broad index, broad sub-index could make it confusing, could actually, because you've also noted in the report that some indicators, they move in the opposite direction, like improving in one indicator means it's better, but the decrease in the value of the other indicator will mean that they're actually not, they're doing better. So, culminating various different kinds of indicators, 10 to 20 indicators, just to make sense of one sub-index could make it a lot more confusing. So that's one broad comment that I wanted to make about the methodology of how to calculate, how you've calculated this index. Some very specific comments on the education and the health sub-indices. In terms of the education sub-index, I do believe that probably you can refer to the ASER data set to try and get a sense of, to get some indicators on the access to quality education. I think it's a no-brainer. Everybody knows that the access to infrastructure, school infrastructure, enrollment rates, etc., all of them have already been achieved across rural urban areas, and we already have more than 95% enrollment rates at all levels of education. But whether this access to schooling infrastructure per se is qualitative in nature or not, and you can actually complement it with you guys, because
Quality, what happens is, and this is what, so last time the main point, like we were talking qualitative consideration, the reason I just sort of came in is because for other indicators apart from education and health became asymmetric proportion. That how do you then measure for qualitative considerations in other pillars? So,
yeah, but in terms of
education is a good point because ASER का ही हम लोगों ने भी इस बार किया था.
even you guys.
But I know what you mean, but
Yeah, but you guys, you can possibly complement ASER and you guys both to make sense of the qualitative aspect. Because you guys has a very rich data set on all sorts of infrastructure, even on something to say on the qualifications of the teachers who are employed in the schools. That has a lot to say on the quality of education that children have access to, specifically when we are comparing access government versus private schools. So that's one comment on the, and the second thing is, I was curious to know why you took the average dropout percentage as one of the indicators in the education index, but not really the gendered dropout percentage. So, I mean, I'm not saying that just keep it focused to the female dropout rate, because we know that the female dropouts is much higher, especially at higher levels of education. So maybe a ratio of female vis-a-vis male. So that is an improvement that you could make to add the gender aspect on the education side. In terms of the health indicator, I do believe that a very important indicator of access to overall good health is the access to early childhood nutrition. And for that, I couldn't, maybe, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there is no indicator as such. Something as simple as ICDS coverage, or, I don't know if you have data on the meals provided in the Anganwadi centers, but something that's worth looking at. And also the reproductive health, the access to contraceptive choices, and like as simple as there's a scheme called Mission Parivar Vikas Yojana that has been launched by the government recently, and the objective, overarching objective of the scheme is to basically improve the contraceptive choices. So these are two aspects that I would recommend that you look at within the health sub-index. And I think, yeah, I'll stop at that because a lot of other overall utility of the report and the implications have already been spoken about. Just one last remark about complementing this study with qualitative analysis, qualitative sort of interviews. I think before even you get into that exercise, what is really important is to engage in a very extensive literature review for state-specific quantitative as well as qualitative studies that will give you the answers to a lot of whys. in terms of why a particular state is doing better in a particular aspect, because there are a lot of studies, there is a lot of existing research, existing work that, I mean, we tend to sort of not look at, which are very specific to a particular state, to a particular aspect. So I think I'll stop at that. So congratulations to the entire team, and it was a very, very interesting discussion.
So, with that, I'll just open up, the conversation also, and we have lunch, so everybody's sort of in discussion and there's a lot to unpack, as I said, with not just the work, but also the topics that have come about. I'll just invite maybe, Seth, Professor Marks, anyone else, Annika, anybody who wants to sort of jump in. Ashita had a question. Ashita, you want to, just maybe unmute yourself, and Ashita, who does, like to speak. And what I'll request is everyone just to very quickly, we started 12 minutes late, so we can just.
Hi, am I audible?
We finished 12 minutes.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, you are.
Oh, hi. First of all, congratulations. I think it's a mammoth task which Siddharth and Dipanshu and the students have undertaken and produced this amazing report. I also believe that this report is the first step. It had to be there so that further steps could be taken. A lot of things have been said by the panelists, and I agree to almost everything that has been said. But there are, being an economist myself, I also struggle with this idea that data analysis versus the reasons of the outcomes that we get from the analysis. So, but in my own journey, I've reached the conclusion that qualitative empirics are even more important than the data analysis. But data analysis, first, as a first step, has to be there, because without that, we won't even know where to go for the qualitative analysis. Some things which I want to point out is that, again, regarding education, the retention ratio is an extremely important ratio. It is more than the enrollment ratio. The retention ratio is extremely important, something which Divya was also talking about right now, that the dropout rates. Again, gender, how gender pictures into that, how other socioeconomic indicators picture into that. The second thing, which I feel is something again, which we miss out on, is understanding why Northeast is always coming, except leaving aside Sikkim, it's coming at a lower this thing. Uh, Probably we do not understand the geographical and the tribal customary institutions that exist in the Northeast. Regarding prison occupancy, I was noticing that Nagaland performed the best. That is, there is a reason for that. The reason is they have an alternative dispute resolution mechanism, and the communities have more faith in that resolution mechanism. So they do not prefer to go to courts, and then therefore prison occupancy is lesser. Another thing which I was noticing was that there was a lot of socioeconomic uh, categorizations, which included SC, ST, OBC, but gendered categorization within SC, ST, OBC was missing. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I missed it, but I think that those gender ratios were missing there. Again, places like states like Sikkim or UP like Chandigarh may be performing better because of the population size of these regions, which is low as compared to the population size of other regions. So that's very important as a consideration. I'm making my points quickly, actually. So another thing, again, access to clean air, which Divya talked about, and sustainability. Disaster management index as a part of access index is very important to be undertaken to understand that what happens, and you can get that data from NDMA and SDMAs to understand how the access changes at the time of disasters, which is climate related. Again, within health, I feel the access to mental health, which would require, of course, not only the number of mental health institutions that exist, but also qualitative data because of the stigma attached to it. Now, I'm going to talk purely quantitative right now because, again, as an economist, I also understand that qualitative is the next step. It takes time. It takes a lot of literature first to understand the region, then getting into the actual surveys that you do. But the quantitative route towards the end, Siddharth's slide was pointing out that there are correlations, and to solve that correlations, you do a principal component analysis, which is where you basically combine factors. After you combine the factors, I think what could be an interesting way to see this is you can do, after the PCA is done, you do an OLS. You do the econometric analysis to get what is having an impact, which independent variables are having an impact on this. Then probably that will inform you where the qualitative study needs to go. These are just my broad comments, and I'm actually very happy that this report is out. It has given me a lot to think about, and these can be probably like the next step could be an OLS and then a qualitative this thing. Just my
Thank you
thoughts.
so much, Ashita. That was very helpful, Professor Marks.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Excellent opportunity to discuss this. I'm pleased to be here. I'm going to try to really condense my remarks because we're out of time. Essentially, I cannot resist, however, drawing upon Sudarshan's reference to the tension between Mahbub al-Haq and Amartya Sen. As I probably have mentioned to you on other occasions, I happen to be present in the Social Council chamber when Mahbub al-Haq was commemorated by Amartya, who essentially apologized for having had his doubts about how an index on a limited number of major issues would be relevant. So we're still doing this, an index. What is its value? You missed an opportunity. There may be an explanation for that. Last week in Calcutta, the Human Development and Capabilities Association held its 20th anniversary. This report should have been launched there. It's a perfect fit. We need to think about it. However, I'd also mention that, sorry? We're institutional members, you're there, you just. It would have been there. While there, John Velez gave the Amartya Sen lecture, but the Mahbub al-Haq lecture was given by Mamta Murthy. How many of you know her? You know her. She's the vice president for human development at the World Bank. What did she say about your topic of indicators? She said, too many SDGs, and certainly far too many SDG indicators. Let's reduce it to one outcome indicator in terms of primarily child completion of education. Okay. So she wanted to narrow it down, and also do only an outcome indicator. You won't be surprised that quite a few of us responded to her on that point. She's doing this in anticipation of the process post SDGs. What is the next formulation going to be? And she wants to limit it and focus on outcome indicators. Obviously, I sense that everybody in this room would join us in resisting that effort. My final point is that I very much welcome the role that the students played in injecting cross-national comparisons along with the India focus of the study. It is an India focused study, but the rankings of states and union territories and so on might provide an incentive for policymakers to focus better. And I think the international comparisons also contribute to those incentives. And my final point is to pick up on the strategic partners point that Naresh mentioned. Indeed, obviously the School of Government and Public Policy was a logical partner for this. Our School of Public Health and Human Development has recently launched a Center for Implementation Research. And this seems to be a fit into that focus of our efforts to try to utilize data better to move from vague policy pronouncements to implementation in the field. Because in a sense, if you certainly take the the social determinants of health, your indicators essentially are 50% public health. That's an invitation to do that with my congratulations and thank you for giving me the floor.
Okay, we have 3 minutes because I'm just sensitive to what we had, but I know there might be things that somebody else who has anything to add or simply want to. Yeah.
It's never good to be the new guy talking before lunch, when we're we're already over time. I just want to say thank you so much for everybody, for all, this is also fascinating. This is my first full day in India on this work trip. And I just happened to be, Dr. Singh was talking about like, who's the audience for evidence-based research? I work on a team internally at Apple that is essentially trying to use government performance indicators to construct sort of a business continuity plan, right? That's what sustainable supply chain resilience is for us. So I've been working with a lot of performance indicators. I've been having internal debates about the HDI, what it does, what it doesn't cover. So lots of follow-up conversations I'd love to have with everybody here. That would be great. Just real quick, one just question that were in my mind, again, with full disclosure that I'm very ignorant about what's happening in India. But I was very curious to think about, I'm thinking a lot about urbanization and migration, given where I sit. And so one of the thoughts I have when I read your report is the access to opportunity going to be the same for somebody from the Northeast who moves to Tamil Nadu or moves to Karnataka? Can I assume that the bundle of rights and opportunities that you're talking about applies to people if they're from interstate ways? So that's one question that's in my mind. On the legal access, access to justice or access to legal recourse, that was my profession for a long time, so I'm fully in favor of keeping it in the report. But I would recommend, you mentioned, Ronald Dworkin was mentioned in your report. He's a professor of mine at NYU. There are other professors at NYU who have been studying sort of global performance indicators in the legal space, and I'm happy to introduce you to some folks on that. I had the same instinct that I think that Dean Ramaswamy had, which is I'm not sure that some of those are saying what you think they're saying. Like, for example, police representation, or like whether or not the ratio of police to folks imprisoned is saying exactly what you want to say about access to justice or legal recourse. That's just my instinct. But I think like there are some folks I can introduce you to that focus on that a lot. Also, in terms of operationalizing this, the World Justice Project, I'm not sure if you're familiar with those folks, but they do really interesting, they can help with follow-up research, I think, because they do a lot of their own surveys. They collect their own data working through legal practitioners in the country. So I think like if you were interested in sort of revising some of these things, I'm happy to connect you with those folks as well. So anyway, thanks so much. This is really interesting. I hope to have follow-up conversations with many of you. There's a lot to talk about. And again, thanks for making my first day in India. Just so enlightening.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Sorry. Others can see. Dr. Sunil Kaul has written a comment. I also feel this is a wonderful effort. Kudos to everyone. We just need to make it better to egg states on to make access to health and education and justice to the poorest segments of the population. Thank you, Dr. Kaul.
Congratulations, first of all. I just have a quick point about the legal which I think is really relevant, but because some of your indicators are talking about the current state of situation, like whether you have clean water or not. You're not talking about how many taps, but you're talking about actually using whether you have clean water. But here you're talking about supply side, Haryana police, etc. How many police? So you have bit on crimes, and if you look at the crimes angle, so I teach a course here on poverty and inequality and statistics with that, and I've just had students who have written reports on crimes in India. And Haryana, drug trafficking, rapes of women, etc. is very high. So your ranks change because if your index is all supply side, then it's all supply side variables. If it's demand side, it's all. So what is happening, which I think it is, when we say there are many educational institutions in Haryana, if we have 13 odd universities here, but how many Haryana students, Haryana people are in those universities? Which I think, if you were to take the legal and justice angle is very important, but if you can perhaps, and it will add to the gender dimension, because the crimes in India has a very big thing on women-related crimes. And can tell you a state of why Kerala is a nice place to live in, say, compared to Haryana. Although we have more employment in Haryana compared to Kerala. So that kind of analysis can come a little better. And secondly, because Professor Naresh Singh already mentioned this about JSGP students, but I'll just add something here. That we are doing a full report on NREGA for 6 states. Those 6 states are the ones that were the middle for your analysis. So if perhaps that could, those reports are very good, they're in the making and they're doing it as a part of the class project. So I'll perhaps be able to share it with you and can add to your detailed analysis of what is happening, what is wrong with these states.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is, so I'm just saying for faculty, we were close with that, probably closing marks 90 and so, see, the center has been working on questions of urban informality. And much, in fact, 90% of our research work is all qualitative in nature. The question of creating this industry happened because a lot of the times when you're presenting our academic studies, this question of narrativizing intersubjective responses through stories, through voices of community, locating agency, informal, unequal sort of, concerns. The question was coming, how do you cater to policymakers and governments? And they would only look to indices and metric-based analysis, which is what the question of evidence-based analysis was coming. So the idea was that you need a quantitative framework and framing as a foundational base, which somewhere allows you to complement the other research we're doing. That core nature of our work, we just published a long essay on the mountains of waste narrative of Balswan, the two landfills. You would have seen it said by coming. So we've been working with the waste pickers community there for about 2 years now. So we have a series of reports coming out from there. That part of the work will stay as it is. There's nothing that is affecting that. But what I realize is that the report needs to, in its writing, need to have balanced conversations around both of these ends, which is what you're getting in qualitative insights and make it more state-oriented. There's a lot of good feedback here. One of the things that I request is before we move to the lunch, and all of you are invited for lunch, is the fact that on, of course, a holiday for all of you to have committed time, students especially. I know you could have chosen the state just to speak that extra bit a little more. Some of you are waiting for your certificates because they want that to be. But thank you again. I thank each one of our panelists. I thank especially Siddharth, who's been a great collaborator. This was my first experience of working with Siddharth. In fact, with ideas, it's been all faculty we're working is all the people I'm working with the first time. So it's been a humbling and also great learning experience. I thank Dean Sudarshan, Dr. Singh, Dr. Kaul, Mr. Venu, Professor Marks, Nikal said, everyone for coming in this morning. And we'll have some felicitation work to do. So as a most senior, I think I would request you to do it students.
He's more senior.
No, I am going to ask you, I'm going to ask you to do it for students. Because for JSGP students, it's audio. And then for panelists, I request, Professor Marks, you're here. For panelists, I request you to felicitate them. Thank you.
That's ageism, sorry. Somebody else.
It's a traditional mindset. Okay.
Come on, man. Come. I'm thinking about. Yeah. Okay, I mean. As much as it. And then. This takes you to function. Yeah, really? Yes, of course, everybody was part of the family. Gosh, okay, so nice to have you here. Yeah.
Getting too much now.
Thank you so much. You were going to get. Okay. Oh, this is a special question. This is truly an honor.
No, I'm really stupid.
All right.
Sir, please. We have sent.
Who's this for?
I'm gonna be more.
Yes.
Well, you might, I know that you're, yes. You know, there's also, okay.
Lunch in T6.
So this is.
You can.
This is called the. This is it.
Was it the same?
Congratulations.
How long is it?